In December 1996, the police were investigating several reports of sudden disappearances of young women in the area. Most of these women were sex workers who sold their bodies illegally for money, leading the police to suspect they were dealing with a psychopathic serial killer targeting sex workers, specifically in southern Baltimore, USA. Despite this conclusion, the police were unable to find any of the girls' bodies, meaning they had no physical evidence to lead them to the wanted killer. Everything changed suddenly when a young woman named Rita came to the police station with an intriguing report. Rita, a prostitute, explained to the police that a large eccentric man had approached her asking about his girlfriend who had left him with their only child. When she told him she knew nothing about it, he attacked her, but she managed to escape his clutches by a miracle. Rita caught the investigators' attention, as they realized they were finally close to getting a detailed description of the killer they had been searching for. Rita identified the man as Joe Metheny, a truck driver who ran a small roadside burger barbecue restaurant. But who was Joe Metheny? Was he really the serial killer, or were the police jumping to conclusions? And if Joe was indeed the killer, where had he been hiding the bodies? Following his attack on Rita, the investigators were able to arrest Joe and put him in custody, but they never expected the large, frightening man to cooperate with them and provide a detailed confession of all his crimes. Joe lived in Ikes near Baltimore and had a harsh childhood, with an alcoholic father and a mother who had to work almost all day to support her family of 6 children because her drunk husband couldn't hold down a job. In 1973, when Joe was just 19 years old, he left his family for good and found a safe haven by joining the Army, which provided him with shelter, food, drink, and a good monthly salary. Joe left the Army after several years and worked in various jobs before finally settling as a truck driver. He lived a tumultuous life with his girlfriend and 6-year-old son in southern Baltimore. It was during this time that Joe began using drugs. Joe spent most of his time on the road for work. One day in 1994, he came home to find that his lover had left with her child, leaving no trace behind. Joe's lover was also addicted to drugs, so he didn't trust her to take care of his only child, which made him obsessed with finding them as soon as possible, in addition to wanting revenge on her for what she had done. Joe searched for his lover and son everywhere she might have gone. For some reason, Joe believed she had left with another addict and was living with him on the streets, where that man forced her into prostitution to make money for their needs and drugs. Joe had no evidence to support the scenario he imagined, but the burly man was confident in it, convinced that his 6-year-old son was suffering greatly with his prostitute mother and her homeless addict lover. So Joe didn't hesitate to keep searching for both his lover and son in the streets and alleys, even knocking on doors and asking residents if they had seen his lover or son. Joe explained to investigators that he intensified his search in places his lover frequented to buy drugs. One day, he went to check under a bridge, a spot he knew she often visited to buy and sometimes use drugs. He didn't find his lover under the bridge, but encountered 2 homeless men. He approached them and asked if they knew where his lover was, but they had no idea what he was talking about. Joe thought the men were being evasive and hiding something, and in his rage, he grabbed an axe from his truck and struck the 2 homeless men, killing them. After committing the murders and releasing his pent-up anger, Joe noticed a fisherman by the riverbank who had been close enough to witness the gruesome act. Joe then approached the fisherman and ensured that he met the same fate as the 2 homeless men. After killing the homeless men and the fisherman, Joe threw the 3 bodies into the river and sped away in his truck, making sure no other witnesses were around. Joe confessed that these murders gave him a sense of satisfaction, and he quickly developed a taste for it, even though his primary motive was the intense anger over what his lover had done to him. Over time, Joe developed a psychopathic addiction to killing, initially justifying his actions by claiming he was searching for his missing lover and son. However, it soon became clear that he continued killing simply because he enjoyed it. Despite Joe's efforts to leave no witnesses at the crime scenes, some people saw his truck leaving and described it to the police, leading to his first arrest in 1994. Joe denied any connection to the murder of a hunter who had been missing for several days. All evidence pointed to Joe's involvement in the crime, and as a result, he spent about 1.5 years in county jail awaiting trial. He continued to deny the charges, and due to his persistent denial and the authorities' failure to find the body he had thrown into the river, he managed to get the charges dropped. After his release, Joe learned that his suspicions about his lover's fate were correct. She had moved to another part of the city with another man. They soon ran out of money due to their excessive drug use, leading the man to force her into prostitution. Eventually, the police arrested Joe's lover and the man she had run away with on charges of drug trafficking and managing a prostitution ring, though they didn't spend much time in jail. Joe's son was placed in foster care by court order, as neither parent was deemed fit to care for him. Joe, who had lost the chance to raise his son forever, eagerly awaited his lover's release from jail, planning to seek revenge. As soon as he got out, Joe began searching for her again. Later, he told investigators he wasn't sure if he wanted revenge or just needed an excuse to continue the thrill of killing, but he continued regardless. One day, Joe encountered two women working as prostitutes. As usual, he asked about his lover, but they knew nothing. Consequently, Joe killed them on the spot. This time, he had a better plan to dispose of the bodies, knowing from previous experience that without bodies, the police would struggle to link the crimes to him. He took the bodies home, removed the fleshy parts from the limbs, head, and other body parts, and stored the meat in the freezer. He buried the remaining parts in the truck yard of the pallet company where he worked. In addition to working as a truck driver, Joe owned a roadside barbecue restaurant where he worked on weekends. Joe mixed the meat of his victims with beef and pork to make the burgers he sold to customers. None of the customers noticed they were eating human flesh. On the contrary, the taste was very rich and consistent, and many praised the quality of the burgers. Joe also ate the burgers himself. He mentioned to investigators that human flesh tastes very similar to pork and is hard to distinguish. When Joe discovered this method of disposing of his victims' bodies while saving money on meat for his restaurant, he intensified his criminal activities. He admitted to investigators that sometimes he would go out specifically looking for a prostitute or a homeless person because he was running low on his meat supply. Joe confessed to having 10 victims, mostly prostitutes, whom he saw as representations of his unfaithful lover who had taken his son from him. He saw no reason to stop his killing spree until he was caught. Following his detailed confessions, Joe was brought to trial, and the jury had no difficulty convicting him of multiple counts of first-degree murder, as well as charges of body mutilation and evidence destruction. Joe was rightfully sentenced to death, especially since he showed no remorse during his trial. His defense team appealed the verdict, and in 2000, Joe's death sentence was commuted to 2 consecutive life sentences, meaning he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Joe expressed that he enjoyed committing these crimes and had no intention of stopping, acknowledging that he was a sick individual. He stated that he knew God had reserved a place in hell for him because of his actions. Despite this, Joe often expressed anger that after all he had done, he never managed to get revenge on his lover and her new partner, who had driven him to become such a monstrous person and deprived him of his son.